This is, however, just the first step. This compromise requires that both parties work together on a larger plan to cut the deficit, which is important for the long-term health of our economy. And since you can't close the deficit with just spending cuts, we'll need a balanced approach where everything's on the table. Yes, that means making some adjustments to protect healthcare programs like Medicare so they're there for future generations. It also means reforming our tax code so that the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations pay their fair share. And it means getting rid of taxpayer subsidies to oil and gas companies and tax loopholes that help billionaires pay a lower tax rate than teachers and nurses.
And these Tea Partiers, as willing conspirators with their so-called leadership, have enacted on a plan to dismantle the American government. And in the process, we have lost our moral compass. We're talking about the debt ceiling now instead of jobs, and what's happening to the shifting income from poor and middle class people to the extreme upper class. We're not talking about jobs, we're talking about a debt ceiling. And what these Republican Tea Partiers are doing is digging a hole down in the basement so deep that there certainly is no semblance of a safety net down there.
Early Monday morning, the crossroads of the world added a new name to its sea of billboards. China's state news agency, Xinhua, lit up a new sign next to some of the world's biggest names.
I think Times Square is the center of the commercial world, and I think that what Xinhua is doing is really putting itself on the world stage and putting it in the company of people like Coca-Cola and TDK, and what they're doing is making their brand feel a lot bigger than it is.
Xinhua's 60 by 40 foot sign shares ad space with the likes of Coca-Cola, Prudential, and Hyundai. The space was previously held by banking giant HSBC. Brian Turner, the president of Sherwood Outdoor Signs, which owns the space, said he believes Xinhua won't be the last Chinese company to spin big and buy into Times Square.
The United States market is really untapped for them. So we expect actually many more companies to follow Xinhua's lead.
Biology Inc.'s Gary Singer said Xinhua's new sign is more than a corporate advertisement. He believes it's another step in raising China's profile as a country.
I think this is a continuation of what China started with the Olympics. They spent a lot more money than they're spending on this sign to get recognized by the world as a world power, and beyond politics, a world commercial power, and this is just a logical next step.
Japanese and Korean brands used Times Square to familiarize customers with their products in the 80s and 90s. Xinhua hopes their new sign will help them do the same.
Hello everyone, welcome to Global Government News. Today is Tuesday, August 2nd, 2011, and I'm Darko. Welcome to this newscast, everyone. My website is ggnonline.com. That's www.ggnonline.com. You can go to YouTube and check out my channel there. It's ddarko2012. Also, there's on Facebook, Global Government News group. You can check that out. Links will be posted in the video's description on YouTube, so check that out. All the headlines and links will be posted along with the Facebook page, Twitter link, and all the way down to the bottom. You can go in there and follow that. Okay. Sorry about that, but that's the introduction I have to present for new listeners here. But I usually start off with the economy, and I have a lot of news to get to in this video, so I'm going to just keep moving here. Dow Plunges 265 points. That's, I believe, 2%. And yeah, 2.2%. And it says here, worries about the U.S. economy push stocks to the longest losing streak in nearly 3 years, sending the S&P's 500 stock index to a 2011 closing low. Then massive rout spells trouble for Wall Street, and there's the little graph. It says the S&P turned negative for the year on Tuesday as the wrangling over the U.S. debt ceiling faded and investors turned their attention to the stalling economy. And then we have U.S. dollar as reserve currency is vulnerable. And it says here Russian Prime Minister Putin's call for a reserve currency other than the dollar basically comes at a time when the U.S. dollar is at its most vulnerable. And speaking of Putin, it says here, U.S. is a parasite on the world economy. Russia's Prime Minister Vladimir Putin said the U.S. is feeding on the world economy like a parasite by building up an unsustainable debt that threatens the global financial system. Of course, this was set up by a little cartel of bankers, just playing countries off each other like China and the U.S., bringing one up and bringing the other down, and then blaming it all on the other and using globalism and basically as a reason to hold countries, sovereign countries. Well, they're not really sovereign anymore after they pass these deals like in Greece and here in the U.S. and that at gunpoint, saying that the economy is going to just implode if you don't pass these measures. And in doing so, they, like I said, they lose their sovereignty, mostly because they're being pushed into it by the media and by governments, and especially these, the IMF and that. It says here China's stocks dropped nearly 1% on Tuesday, set on Tuesday with the benchmark Shanghai Composite Index down 0.91%. Next up, we have Chinese stocks declined to 6-week low on manufacturing slowdown and inflation. China's yuan weakens against U.S. dollar 20 points. It says here Treasury yields hit lowest levels since November. Then moving on to commodities, we have mostly down. We have Brent crude down 35 cents at $116. Gas oil futures basically down $2.75. Heating oil futures down almost $2. Natural gas basically even. Moving down to agriculture, mostly up. The big ones that are up is corn, wheat futures, then soybean. Cocoa was down 22. Then copper is actually down, and it's trading at $436.70. Gold at $1,663, up almost $19. Silver at $40, and it was up 72 cents. So gold's on fire right now. Gold futures top 1,660 on demand for haven amid economic crisis. That's right. They want something. Investors want something with real intrinsic value and not just a fake digital currency, or a promissory note that you're going to repay your debt. Soaring demand spotlights secret New York gold hoard, and it says gold prices hit a record on Friday, reflecting nervous rush by private and national investors. So you can go in there and check that out. And it says here Korean central banks join rush to gold. Central bankers are ramping up their gold buying as they seek to diversify their reserves away from dollars and other beleaguered currencies. South Korea, became the latest government to disclose a big bullion purchase, saying Tuesday that it bought 25 metric tons, more than doubling its holdings to 39 metric tons. Mexico, Russia, and Thailand have also been major buyers in 2011. It says crude oil drops to 5-week low on weaker U.S. growth outlook and small businesses souring on sugar policy. And we all know about high fructose corn syrup, why we have it, because sugar is so expensive. It says here federal limits on the supply of imported sugar in the U.S., that's the reason, are boosting prices for bakeries, candy makers, and other small businesses, according to the president of the sweetener users. So they're having an annual meeting about it. Spiking cotton prices hurts quilters' wallets, so more commodity news. Goldman's new money machine, or warehouses know. Really what it is that a string of warehouses in Detroit, mostly operated by Goldman Sachs, has stockpiled more than 1 million tons of industrial metal aluminum, about a quarter of the global reported inventories. In other words, artificial scarcity. U.S. auto sales remain sluggish, then faltering consumer spending to weigh on growth, because 2/3 of the economy is consumer spending. So it's here manufacturing growth hits lowest level in 2 years. That's in the U.S. And then Chinese manufacturing falls in 4th consecutive month. Commercial mortgage late payments, a record, so people not making their payments on time. Then mortgages are holding steady, talking about mortgage rates. Power runs short in South China, talking about the electric grid. And then here in Texas, again, Texas Energy declares electric emergency amid heat. Then most Americans oppose debt ceiling deal, according to a poll. On my personal poll on GGN, most voters said no. And then in other polls, mainstream polls, they were saying no. It says here, Gallup, Obama's approval hits all-time lows with independents, moderates, and conservative Democrats. Representative Ron Paul introduces bill to cancel $1.6 trillion in debt held by Federal Reserve. U.S. borrowing to surge after debt cap raise. So we already knew that, but they said it wasn't going to happen, right? The truth about the debt deal, it's pretty much meaningless. U.S. debt limit really doesn't limit debt. The federal debt limit is a triumph of false advertising. It doesn't really limit the national debt. Whenever the false ceiling has been reached, it has been raised, forcing unpopular votes in Congress, but not the really hard ones it would take to cut spending, raise revenues, and balance budget. Who gains from the debt deal? The Pentagon, it says here, rather than cutting $400 billion in defense spending to 2023. It says here in April, the current debt proposal trims $350 billion through 2024, effectively giving the Pentagon $50 billion more than it had expected over the next decade. And quickly, 7 startling things most people don't know about the national debt, banking, and the money supply. First is the FDIC insurance fund. There is no FDIC insurance fund. Then there are no Social Security funds either. Remember, that's to pay off the bankruptcy from 1933. It says here the U.S. Treasury is stealing money from you every day, even if you pay no taxes. Next up, we have the balanced solution isn't balanced. That's what we're talking about, the debt ceiling. The government is going to steal everything from you before it collapses. That's right, and they're doing that right now. Number 6, most people have no idea about fractional reserve banking, derivatives, the money supply, or the Federal Reserve. And 7, most people are betting their lives on the dollar. So it's here, White House is seek tax hikes in special committee created by debt deal. And that was the whole point of this special committee, because they knew that they weren't going to just be taxing the rich. They were going to be taxing what? Social programs that actually help people. Super Congress moves forward despite Tea Party opposition. Then Congress to vote on Super Congress that could be usurped to impose gun control. Then it says here, Super Congress getting even more superpowers than debt deal. Very scary stuff. It says under the reported framework legislation, the new congressional committee rights would be fast-tracked through Congress and could not be filibustered or amended. So great, guys. It was whatever power we had as a republic, it's now gone, and it's been written away in a effing financial legislation to save the economy. You've lost your representation in a financial bill. How does that work? But it does, because that's all what it's all about. The sheeple are just, put the whatever over their eyes. It's all smoke and mirrors, and they don't effing get it. They just don't. They have to be a lot sharper to see what the heck's going on here. So it makes sense. You see that representative in that video in the beginning here, and then you have Joe Biden liking Tea Partiers to terrorists, which makes sense, right? Because then you have the guy in Norway, he's linked to the Tea Party too. So now, if you're against open borders, if you're against wasteful spending, and all this crap that's going on with the government going just basically exploding in size and just stealing people's rights and their privacy, and if you're against that, well, you're a terrorist. And I've been saying this for 2 years now. Fiscal conservatives barred from super committees, so that makes sense. They're just not going to be a part of it. Fed may weigh more stimulus on slow recovery, so look at that. The makers are start weighing in additional steps to prop up the recovery, by bringing on more stimulus. It says U.S. rating at risk of negative outlook. So, after all that, we got to keep interest rates down, and we got to make sure we keep our good rating. IMF warns interest rates will have to rise. Then industrial groups warn of perfect storm as Reserve Bank in Australia prepares for interest rate decision. Then we have recession panel majority sees rising odds of a renewed U.S. economic slump. So you're going to keep seeing these stimuluses and all whatever financial bills being passed, basically, with all kinds of other stuff like martial law stuff and surveillance cameras being funded and stuff like that. Spy satellites. You're all going to see. You'll still see that snuck into bills, but it's going to be more bailouts or stimuluses or whatever the hell they want to call it. This one was called a debt ceiling bill. It says here, U.S. Less than 3 years away from being Greece, says Walker. That's what the former Comptroller General said. And then look at this, Greek debt crisis, a Goldman Sachs economic coup. So go in there and check that out. Banks have a new remedy to America's ailing housing market. That's bulldozing, so bulldozing houses. And then you got people like this, the tent city of New Jersey, desperate victims of economic slump, forced to live in makeshift homes in force. Actually, that guy did a pretty good job on that, but that's very, very sad. Just demolishing homes. Ghost towns on the increase as rural America counts for just 16% of the population, and it was 72% in the early 1900s. Rural U.S. disappearing and populations hit all-time lows. Europe in for higher youth unemployment, and then we have Barclays to cut 3,000 jobs. HSBC is going to cut 30,000 jobs. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.